Hello and welcome to Solopreneur, the show that helps business owners who are flying solo to solve their big sales, marketing and systems challenges one episode at a time. You can watch the video version of this episode at solopreneur.com. I'm Gareth Everson, and on today's episode I'm going to be talking about how we can create an index of the content that we've created. And the reason that that's important or valuable for your business is that with all of this effort that you're putting in to create content, plan content, share content, and promote it, we can sometimes forget what we've got and where we've used it. If you are creating core content like blog posts, podcasts, webinars even, sometimes when we get embroiled in this hamster wheel of the work that we do as experts, we can forget what we've created in the past. Emails, social media posts, even resources that relate to some of our core pillar content. And this idea for this topic, I'd actually overlooked it. It was perhaps down to my own curse of expertise, but the idea for having this episode actually came from a listener. So if you're listening to this, James, thanks for the suggestion and thanks for the request to cover this as a topic because, in all honesty, I'd overlooked it. And what I don't want you to do, having put the effort into creating great content that helps you to promote your business, to end up in a cycle of when you're talking about the things that you do and the problems that you solve, to have to create that multiple times. If you create something once, you should be able to repurpose that multiple times. And that's part of systemizing your business. Do something once well that you can then reuse elsewhere and repurpose and get the maximum amount of value from. So James, thank you for the suggestion. Let's cover this topic on today's episode. I don't want you to get bogged down with the mechanics of the format that we're going to store this index in. If a document format works best for you or an Excel spreadsheet type format works best for you, go with that. There are other tools like Airtable or Monday.com that have a better sort of visualization and link up between items in there in terms of the visual representation of a database. For me, what works best is spreadsheets, but I know others that keep this index in multiple different formats. So think about what works best for you as a reference source for you and your team. Now, as we know, content, if we're using it well, can be in multiple places and multiple formats if used effectively. A blog post might also appear repurposed as a LinkedIn article. You could have snippets of that post or references to that post in social media content that you've created. When you're building an email list, you're probably sharing some of this stuff to your email list. And if you're not doing so, I'd recommend that you do so. And if you're creating visual or audio content, that will exist in multiple different places like your podcast host or on YouTube, or perhaps in private videos that you host on, say, Vimeo or on Amazon. If you're using this content to generate interest and generate leads, you'll also have landing pages that you're pointing people to be able to download and access resources that come off the back of this content. So those need to be covered as well in whatever index that you're creating. And of course, if you're getting opt-ins on landing pages or funnel pages, you'll also have emails that talk about the delivery of those assets and have some sort of follow-up around it. So the variety of different things that you need to have and capture by content piece. So when it comes to thinking about that document, whether it is a document format, a spreadsheet, or an Airtable, think about how you're going to structure the information that's in there. Are there categories of topics that you talk about? Individual topics you might have information aligned to? You probably don't want to have each individual post or piece of content just listed without any categorization. In my spreadsheet, I'll order the content that I create by specific topics, and that works for me. So I'll have topic headings from highest priority topics, the most important things that I'm sharing with my audience. I'll then have underneath that some of the core pillar content around that. So it might be my most meaningful quarterly content that I'm creating. And then underneath that, it might have my monthly theme and then my individual podcast episodes or weekly posts underneath that. So they're all in a spreadsheet format, different rows that I've got in there that cover the different topics. You've got a lot more flexibility with a document format to be able to squeeze content in there and align content to specific topics. But for me, spreadsheets work well because once I've then got a row that represents, say, the individual article that I'm sharing, I can then have multiple columns that come after it that talk about or that have links to, say, the emails that I've sent out, the social media posts that I've sent out, and other formats that content has gone in. Think about structuring the document in a way that allows you to see all related content, all related posts, content, articles, references to that particular core piece of content so that you can access it easily. And learn how to, if you don't know already, link to those individual posts or those articles from your document. If we go back to episode 28, where I talked about the annual content plan, you'll remember that having that plan with those core pillars and the individual posts and the social media posts and emails that go with that, you end up with a bank of hundreds of pieces of content and micro content across the year. And with the best will in the world, we don't have a memory bank that can remember where all of those resources are. And Google and other indexing services don't have access to our private listings of all of that. So we can't rely on a third-party service like Google to tell us where they are. So having this document, this repository, this content index allows our fallibility of being able to remember what we've used and what we've posted. It allows us to have that single reference source of what's where so that we can come back to it and reuse it, repurpose it, point people to it or point people to articles or posts if they're asking. So have a play around with the format that you want to store this in. I'll include in the show notes a link to a template version of the one that I use. It's a spreadsheet format. If that doesn't work for you, play around with document formats or have a look at Airtable if you want to go a little bit deeper in terms of linking up content to other topics or enabling automations that when you change one record, it triggers a notification for somebody else to do something with it. You're probably not going to get this right first time. When you draft what your content index looks like, it will probably require a number of different iterations for you to be able to hone in how that works best for your business. What I share with you works well for me, but it might not work well for you. So just have that in mind that this is a process. It's not a final outcome. And it's also a process that you'll need to stay on top of to be able to keep this index up to date. So what kind of things can we use to stay on top of that index? Well, when you think about the tools that you use just in your day-to-day, in your business, have a think about when you are drafting content, can that go into specific folders, either on your computer or your Google Drive or in your Dropbox, that you and other members of your team or virtual team can access and see, and there's a logical structure to it? For example, when I'm recording podcasts, I have on my computer folders that start with the podcast, and then it has subfolders in there that have different episode numbers. And within any one episode, I've got multiple resources that are stored in there. I've got the video file format, I've got the audio format, I've got little snippets that you'll see that I post on social media. I've got the transcript in there, and I've also got any additional notes that relate to that episode. Then I use a CRM and I sell and support a CRM that's managed by Go High Level. My version of it is called Lemonade Plan. But within Go High Level, when you're creating emails or you're creating landing pages or you're creating social media content, it's got its own folder-based structure. So whenever I'm creating an email campaign that goes out to promote podcast episode, I can put that in my podcast announcements folder. Whenever I'm creating a LinkedIn article, I've got a LinkedIn articles folder. Blogs, similarly. So think about how you also use core software that relates to your business. And it doesn't just apply to your core content. When you're supporting that content that you are publishing with social media posts, if you use the social media planner in a Go High Level based system, it's also got a means for you to be able to categorize that content and apply tags to it. Why is that important? Well, if you're taking the time to create thoughtful and meaningful posts that are going into various different social media outlets, you may want to reuse those somewhere down the line. Because the likelihood is that whoever's following you on Instagram or LinkedIn or somewhere like that will have forgotten about that content in certainly 6 months' time. If you've got good performing content that you've shared once, think about how you can reuse that later down the line, and categorizing that in your social media planner, or if you're not using a social media planner, somewhere else in your content index is a good way to be able to do that, so that you can reshare content that has worked and engaged in the past. So all of these content indexing resources that are private to you and your team are all very well. But what about where you want to have almost like a greatest hits of your content for members of the public? Perhaps a summary or digest blog post on your website. These are great ways of being able to bring together content that others have found meaningful or that you think your audience will find meaningful in one place, and having that occasional blog post or episode that bring together and combine some of your greatest hits content is a great place to be able to point people to as kind of one place where they can see and hear and listen to and what content that you've shared before around a topic that's meaningful for them. You can also include some of those greatest hits, if you like, some of the content that's worked best for you in the past in your welcome email nurture sequence. So the way that you do that is when somebody's opted in on a landing page for a particular topic or resource or lead magnet, you'd follow up with them in the first few emails around that piece of content, but then seed them in to a more general follow-up that includes some of the greatest hits content that you have, or as I like to call it, the kind of should ask questions or frequently asked questions type content that comes off the back of it. That's a whole genre in its own right of content that relates to your business and to the problems that you solve that helps your clients. So give that some thought too. One of the biggest failings that I see with new clients or people that haven't discovered me where I've been on their list is that they'll follow up for 2 or 3 emails after a lead magnet opt-in, and it'll be emails that you receive perhaps even every day for 2, 3, 4 days, and then you hear nothing from them afterwards. That's one of the biggest missed opportunities for expert-based businesses to be able to share their insights and expertise with their new audience. So having this greatest hits or frequently asked questions or should ask questions type content in your first education sequence after the opt-in really pays dividends. And it solves that problem when you're staring at a blank sheet of a page on your computer, when you're thinking about what's going to go into that first 90-day sequence that people who opt into your list are going to receive. You've already got a bank of content, of greatest hits, of meaningful insights and stories and problems that you solve to be able to share with them. So don't overlook that opportunity to do that. so important that you're able to engage that new audience that has discovered you and has valued your lead magnet enough to opt in. Don't lose that opportunity to be able to nurture them with other insights and other problems that you solve in that 90-day sequence. If you'd like to get the resource that goes with this episode, if you go to solopreneur.com/content-index, you'll be able to get access to my spreadsheet template that I use. It's a cleaned up version of it as a base for thinking about how you index the content that you're creating in your business. The link is also in the show notes. Today's topic is very much one of those that's a little bit subtler in terms of systemizing your business. But if you recall what we covered on episode 24 when we talked about the forks in the road, it's having resources and assets like this in your business that help you turn from being a single person business into maybe a multi-person or virtual team type business that is able to run effectively. Have a think about how you are creating and managing content in your business and how you're repurposing and reusing that content. Are you hindered by the fact that things that you have created in the past that have struck a chord with your audience, you haven't been able to use that effectively going forward, or you found yourself recreating things that you've made in the past and not made the best use out of all the content assets that you have? If you fall into that bracket, then I'd encourage you to think about this more subtler topic of having a content index a little bit more. If you've got any questions around this or in any of the other content planning, creation, and promotion topics that I've covered in the last few episodes, or indeed any of the other systems-related topics that I talk about on this podcast, don't hesitate to get in contact. My DMs are open on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to get me. And you can go directly to my profile if you go to askgareth.com, and let's have a conversation from there. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you valued this episode, please share it with somebody else. And even better, if you have a few moments, don't hesitate to write a positive review wherever you're listening to this episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Solopreneur Podcast. Remember that what we learned today builds more value if there's a plan to take action on it tomorrow. So head to solopreneur.com and check out our growing community of action takers and all the training and software that you need to build a scalable business without breaking the bank. And if you value the show, please help others to discover it too by leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts, or by sharing a link to an episode on LinkedIn or wherever your finger does its scrolling.